Thank you all for joining us today. This is the first webinar from the management group covering marketing. It follows on from the highly successful series of webinars on finance that we have been running and where we have had around 600 people participating in each session. We very much hope that this new initiative will prove equally successful. I'd like to start by introducing ourselves. My name is Christopher Simpson and my colleague Tim is presenting a case study as part of this program. I've been involved in running fairly large businesses in the UK and the US and Germany. And when I retired from my last position, I set up with colleagues a small consultancy business. And much of the work we do now is in Germany. I'm also a Sloan Fellow at the London Business School. And as you can see, Tim Podesta has had a very distinguished career in BP, and he also now acts in the field of consultancy. And we're both fellows at the Institution of Mechanical Engineers and members of the Management Group Board. The management group is established to support the development of engineers to maximize their potential, to increase the managerial skills of engineers with a focus on young engineers making the transition from a mainly technical role into management positions. We want to promote and distribute the best practice in engineering management to the members of the institution, both in the UK and overseas. We support the annual Essential Management Skills Conference for young engineers, and we try and encourage an increase in the number of engineers in the most senior leadership roles in both the public and private sectors. The aim of this webinar is, in the brief time available, to provide an introduction to the main elements of marketing with a specific emphasis on the marketing of high added value engineering products and what differentiates this from the marketing of consumer durable and non-durable products, and to provide a short case study of a marketing project successfully completed. I'll start by making a brief review of the fundamentals of marketing. Marketing is a process of bringing essentially sellers and buyers together, and it can be summarized as defining the market and quantifying the performance required by the buyer, developing the value propositions, which means the relationship of benefit to the customer set against the price. It includes what we often call the 4 Ps, the where and how, defined as product, price, promotion, placement, and also, most importantly, subsequently monitoring the value that is delivered. I just want to make a very short comment regarding pricing, and I'd like to emphasize that in my view, this must not be based on the cost of production, but on the price of the product that can be advantageously sold in the market. The cost of production only determines if it is possible to sell the product with an adequate profit margin. It is the market that should determine the price of the product sold. If we look at the historic view of marketing, it was very much production orientated, optimizing the production capability and capacity, then manufacture the product, then initiate what was often an aggressive selling campaign, and thus attempt to attract the customer. The more modern approach to success in manufacturing is market orientated, and it starts by identifying customer needs, defining market opportunities, process and product innovation, which is obviously key, protect new products and processes with patents, Again, a very, very important aspect, particularly if one's involved in international business. Market the products, and as you'll see, I put in capitals here, services, and I'll talk a little more about that later, and hence to attract the customer. Success using a modern approach includes downstream integration to achieve profitable services, market research to allow customers to impact on new product development, flexibility and customization to meet specific customer needs. Regard product sales as a means to open up opportunities for the provision of services, and it's often this latter point which will allow even more satisfactory profit margins to be secured. And then to point out that one needs continual awareness of the possibility of new disruptive technologies. Marketing orientation. It needs to be externally focused and based on market research. The emphasis continually on customer benefits, a high level of customer service and commitment, a high level of customer contact, an overall concern regarding quality. Marketing for durable and non-durable consumer products is largely founded on advertising campaigns aimed at a very large and diverse customer base. The market for most engineered high-value products can be more closely defined than with the consumer products, and the marketing strategy designed accordingly. This is usually defined as business to business, B2B marketing. When promoting consumer products and using largely advertising, the advertising can be measured in terms of change in market share. Much of this, however, is irrelevant if you're in a company selling, shall we say, turbine generators, or indeed most engineering products where volumes generally are much smaller and profit margins often constrain the advertising budgets. So it's what I call the buckshot approach, i.e. the widespread activity is appropriate for consumer products, but the rifle shot approach is much more appropriate for B2B engineered products and capital projects. A further key point, the most significant factor in the marketing of engineered durable products is the establishment of trust and confidence between the buyer and the seller. Unlike consumable products where a buyer can be relatively easily persuaded initially to take a few products for trial with little risk to either party, most transactions for engineered durable products and capital projects can fundamentally impact on the respective financial positions of both buyer and seller, and on the reputation and indeed the career prospects of the people involved. Marketing information systems. This is fundamental to establish and maintain the most effective interface between the company and its customers, both actual and potential. It provides a flow of information in both directions and facilitates networking. It's possible to use the data to define trends in the market and react accordingly, measure customer satisfaction, assist in formulating the pricing strategy, advertising forward planning production schedules, and the ordering of long lead time items. I recollect with my previous company, we were so confident in the information that could be generated through the MIS that long lead items and very expensive items, such as castings, were ordered well in advance of actual orders being received. The management information system can also assist in new product design and development, and critically, it assists in managing and monitoring the performance of the sales force. The type of marketing information system is important. Considerable care has to be exercised in selecting the most appropriate MIS for a particular business. There are many different options available from a multiple of suppliers, but a word of warning that most are consumer product orientated with a focus on social media type communication. The very best option is to design and develop your own MIS, but clearly this is not feasible for smaller companies. If it's necessary to acquire an MIS platform from outside, then ensure that it is flexible and can be modified as necessary to suit the specific needs of the business. Clearly, without the essential data related to customers, both actual and potential, the MIS is of little use. The challenge is initially to generate this data and then, most importantly, continue to keep it up to date. Much data is likely to be available from existing contacts, databases, and records within the business. Further sources of data can be purchased from specialist suppliers of lists of potential customers. But beware, I have to say my experience has been very mixed, and very often one finds that the data is far from up to date. Sending communications to somebody who's already left a company, or even worse, is dead, doesn't actually help with the marketing initiative. What I can recommend is access to financial databases, such as the ones produced by Van Dijk. There the information is based on the latest published accounts of the company and is likely to be much more up to date. Websites, research and email shots can also be of considerable assistance in generating data. And finally, and I would say most valuably, it's the sales team in the field that take the prime responsibility in generating new marketing data and ensuring that the current data is up to date. I want to talk briefly about the role of the sales engineer. So much emphasis is now placed on the internet and social media for communication, but the difficulty is that the volume is such that frequently the key messages get lost. Personal contact is essential if the trust and confidence that I referred to previously is to be achieved. One of the most important functions is to ensure that all relevant projects in their area are identified. There are usually many legitimate reasons why a contract is not secured, but there should be no excuse for not knowing of an impending project and thus not being in a position to compete for the business. The key issue of limited resources available for engineering studies, proposals, tenders, cycle time calculations, etc., is highly important. The first is to establish as far as possible that the customer's project is approved in principle and funding available. Otherwise, time, resources can be squandered on projects that never materialize. It's as well to remember that it is not just the direct cost of quoting, bidding for a contract that never materializes, but also the opportunity cost, i.e. the resources which could have otherwise been used on another project with better prospects of success. Advertising and other promotional activity. With the inevitable constraint on advertising budgets, the question is how best can the resources be utilized? It is usually best to concentrate on a limited number of technical journals and build up a close relationship. When this is achieved, it opens up the opportunities for so-called editorials, where the journal agrees to publish information that is provided, including, for example, new products and processes, case studies, new employees. Case studies often prove to attract wide interest. In-house exhibitions are usually highly effective and allow quality time with customers. The other obvious channel is through major exhibitions, both national and international. These, however, come at very considerable cost, and it is not easy often to measure the real success. I was recently at a major exhibition in Stuttgart, and I have to say on this occasion it was highly successful. We were assisting one of our German clients in this. So all I would say is that one has to exercise considerable caution when committing to such major expenditure, and to recognize that probably the prime motivation to attend has more to do with worries of perception if you are not present at the exhibition. I'm now going to move on very briefly to exporting. This topic would easily form a whole webinar in itself, so I'll limit this section to just a few observations, and these are strategy, agency or subsidiary, languages, custom and practice, and UK export support. With respect to strategy, and this applies particularly in the United States, I would argue that unless you are a very large organization with very considerable resource, it's probably better to focus on one or two geographic key areas. If you don't do this, then you find your salespeople spending an inordinate amount of time sitting in an aeroplane flying from one location to another. With respect to agencies or subsidiaries, I would in general suggest that your own subsidiary is likely to be more successful. I had the experience with one of the subsidiaries within our group, manufacturing laboratory equipment, mainly for the engineering industries. Had spent 10 years trying to build up a business in the United States using a variety of agencies. And we decided to abandon that and set up our own operation in Houston, and literally within 1 year we had had more success in the previous 10 years. Agencies certainly have their place, particularly in remote countries, but beware that there is often a conflict of interest with some agencies acting for a number of different companies. This can be a problem. Languages. I just ask you to reflect if a German or a French company tried to sell in the UK, how successful would they be only commuting in their own language? we all know that English is regarded as the international language, but in my view, it will guarantee in almost all cases that you can go around the world speaking English if you're buying something. If you're selling something, it is very, very different. If apart from the very large international companies in Germany and elsewhere, where they have the custom or have decided that they will adopt English as their main language for communication, with smaller companies this is not the case, and it is unwise to assume that within the companies there are people who will speak English, and to assume that continuing to speak English with them presents no disadvantage is very often not the case. I'll just also refer to export support. In my experience over recent years, there's been a considerable improvement in the level of UK government support to exporters. And if you are going down this route, as I would strongly encourage, then do take advantage of the government advice and support. This has been a very brief overview, and I hope it's been of some assistance, but I'd now like to hand over to my colleague Tim, who's going to talk to you about a particular experience that he had within BP.
Christopher, thank you. Can I just do a sound check? Can you hear me, Christopher?
Yeah, fine.
Thank you so much. So, Christopher, thank you so much for your kind introduction, in fact, for your outline of marketing. Certainly for me, a bit of a masterclass. I'm passionate about professional development and sharing learning and learning for myself, and that's why I'm here today. And I want to share my experience of a time in my career when I was involved with setting up of a marketing business and in fact as an engineer, learning on the job, as it were. So fairly early in my career as an engineer, I just become a chartered engineer, in fact, with BP. I was seconded to the gas business planning unit in Glasgow. Now, at that time, BP and Britoil, which was the old national oil company, were merged and became the biggest gas producer in the UK, in the North Sea and southern North Sea. And this was at a time when the market was being opened up. Up to this point, British Gas had been the monopoly for infrastructure and supplying gas to customers, industrial customers, residential customers in the UK. And we entered a period where in the opening up, there was opportunities to create new business and move down the value chain. And there was a so-called dash for gas at that time. Gas was, and in fact still is, a fuel which has a much lower carbon content than other carbon-based fuels. And at that time, there was a definite opportunity for its use in power generation, for industrial heat, and for residential heating. The planning department I was seconded to, it was my first opportunity to work in a commercial environment. And at that point, I'd taken an interest in commercial matters, and I'd, through becoming a chartered engineer, had taken an opportunity to develop some commercial awareness. The Monitored Professional Development Scheme at that time, and as today, it does encourage engineers to get an experience of commercial matters. And I'd done something called the Diploma in Engineering Management, which at that time was a useful basis. So building on that, part of the gas business planning unit in Glasgow, that department was tasked with setting up a BP gas marketing business. So this is my story around my contribution to creating that gas marketing business and what I learned. The market we were focusing on was industrial. It was for power generation, industries like cement, glass and chemicals, whereas as a fuel and as a feedstock, gas was something which was of value. And being part of that startup, it was a crash course in marketing. I learned from others and learned from being able to work with customers. Although I did subsequently do an MBA to build on that experience, this was my, in a sense, feet in the fire. So what did I learn from this experience? So what did I learn about marketing from that experience? Well, first of all, there was the importance of having information and data. As Christopher's mentioned, he talked about the MIS, Management Information System, and also the Customer Relationship Management. Being part of the gas marketing business, we put a huge amount of effort into creating a database of potential clients, understanding the market and the different sectors. And within that, identifying contacts and key information so that we could know who we were talking to when we tried to create relationships and were looking to develop customer opportunities. It was also important to do that because it allowed us to align as a team. There were 6 of us in the team. It wasn't a large team, but to align across that team. So we had consistent approaches to particular clients, and also in a number of industries, we had clients, particularly in things like glass and cement, where you had different operating sites, and each of those was an opportunity to provide a valued service in terms of the gas supply and energy. So that was probably the first thing I learned about marketing, was the importance of having that information and using it well and keeping it up to date, as Christopher said. Now, the second thing I learned was the importance of relationships, and particularly understanding the customer's business and understanding what, from a customer's perspective, what their alternatives might be. A particular example that I remember very well was being involved in the negotiating of supplying gas to a new gas-fired power plant. And for that organisation that we were looking to supply the fuel for, we needed to understand their business model. They were looking to generate electricity, and the market for generating electricity was very much dependent on the alternatives, which might be other fuels, particularly coal, which gas was going to be replacing. So it was very helpful to understand and actually have a shared value of understanding with the client, and as an engineer, able to articulate the sources of those values in terms of efficiencies, in terms of utility, and in terms of other aspects for using a cleaner fuel, emissions being one of them. And also to have an understanding of potential future market developments. In creating a marketing relationship, it wasn't just all about the one-off sale, it was for a long period of time, and we were looking to put in place a supply contract which would be sustainable in the long term. So that was the second lesson, understanding the customer's business, where the value was for them, and particularly their alternatives. The third thing I learned was very much around the customers and the people in their organisation. Actually understanding the organisation, who would influence decisions, who would be the decision makers, and also, if possible, understand the process that they will be going through to potentially placing an order, so that you could be not quite part of their organisation, but actually to be as helpful as possible to the information they might need as they went through a particular approval process. The procurement processes for each organisation you may come across will have similar practices, but the detail will be different, and it's helpful to understand. And in this particular case, actually going to the customer site, understanding their culture, as well as their processes, certainly made a difference in being able to meet their needs and also understand what the value beyond the actual value of the product would be. There are other things that the customer would be interested in, potentially around, they might be looking for a bundled offer. There might be other aspects of energy which they could be interested in. I seem to remember in this case there was a conversation around providing backup fuel as well as gas, and also potential technical support. That can be an important part of an offer, and understanding the customer's needs through the relationship was a way of developing that understanding and creating the trust. Christopher did mention the importance of the relationship and trust in getting a deal done. So those are three key lessons I learned actually from experience on the job, all reinforced by doing an MBA at a later stage. But there's nothing like getting actual experience in a commercial environment to develop one's commercial understanding. So that's my story. Look forward to hearing stories that you might have to share, and particularly any questions you have related to those. So, reflecting on what Christopher and I have shared with you, what I'd like to summarise that from our experience, there are two specific competencies which we believe an engineer brings to a marketing environment. One is problem solving, and the second one is an understanding and knowledge of maths, science and technology, particularly where those are important for a customer and in the product they're looking for. So two competencies, and in effect what they provide to a marketing organisation are three things. First of all is through that ability to problem solve, actually understanding the customer's problem, because at the end of the day is where the value is providing us the product. In understanding that problem, the second thing is identifying solutions. And the third thing is providing support to major change and innovation. And as an engineer, I believe that we are naturally innovative and able to deliver change where change is needed, and that can be quite supportive in a marketing environment where you're looking to understand where the customer may be needing to or looking to innovate. So supporting change in a positive way. So those are the three things that the engineer provides within a marketing environment, and we've got a summary of those on the slide. Thank you so much for listening. I'll just do a sound check with Fiona or Christopher, if you could hear me, please.
Yes, I can hear you, Tim.
Thank you. Yeah, so that completes the presentation that Christopher and I have prepared. Thank you so much for listening. We've got a really good number of attendees and looking forward to some good Q&A. We've already got some very good questions come through in the chat box. One that's come up a couple of times is around access to the recording afterwards, which will be available on the IMechE website within about 7 days, I'm told. And the slides should be available on request if people want to see those as well. But the recording is the main thing, which will be available for you. So going to the questions, and please keep them coming in. We've got a good chunk of time to cover those, and Christopher and I are very much looking forward to answering them. In terms of one question, I think Graham has come up with, which I'd like to address to Christopher. It's around the use of social media and online events, which has become certainly more apparent in terms of marketing and reaching customers in the last couple of years through the restrictions to travel and the working from home environment. So the question is really around our experience of using social media and how that's changing the world of marketing and the opportunities that we should be looking to use that for. So, Christopher, would you like to share a bit more about how social media and online has been impacting what you've seen?
Yes, thank you, Tim. I have to confess that my experience in this area is fairly limited. As I said in my presentation, I find that social media is probably better suited for use in marketing consumer products rather than engineering products. And as I said at the time, my experience is that when using social media, it does tend to, because there is so much volume, the message sometimes gets lost. But undoubtedly, it does have some value. But my proposal would be that alternative channels in marketing engineered products are probably more effective. Tim, I don't know whether you wish to add to that.
Well, certainly I've seen the plethora of online events, and an area I'm active at the minute is in the hydrogen, which clearly is the gas of the future. And I've seen that online events have been a very good way of reaching new clients, networking with new people. But I think you have to be quite discerning and focused, because it is possible to spend all your time on online events, and when actually it's the one or two key ones that will probably make the most difference. So thank you so much for that question, Graham. Question from Raymond around the use of subsidiaries rather than agents. He suggests that he understands and agrees in principle, but what about major capital goods which cannot be sold in large quantities in a given market? How might one cover the costs of a local operation? So I don't know, Christopher, if you can relate to that question and the distinction of using subsidiaries and agents in relation to looking at the overseas markets.
Yes, thank you. It is a complex matter. As I said in the presentation, I tend to favour where it's possible to use one's own subsidiary. I think one has a better control. There aren't conflicts of interest. But one has to also to recognise that there are countries, particularly in the Middle East and the Far East, where, for a variety of reasons, it's more practical to go through the agency route. Speaking from experience, one of the problems that one faces in certain countries in the Middle East is the control that one can exercise and the whole question of potential corruption. And I find that if you find a reputable agent, then that is perhaps the best way of developing the market. But otherwise, in European countries and in the States, my experience is that I would strongly go for establishing one's own local subsidiary.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. And that story you shared about setting up an office in Houston was a great example of that. A question from Javier, and this is one around, I guess, the initial stages of marketing. And he's asking, if, on having found a new potential client, how to actually make that initial contact, and this concept of cold contacts, and without feeling like you're becoming an unwelcome approach or even spam. Certainly from my experience, it can be quite hard to make that first contact. But it helps to find the right person, and even to find an introduction, if that's at all possible, through networking. That can be a good way of making an entry, building that rapport. So Christopher, what's your advice to overcoming the hurdle of getting to new clients and in a sense the risk of being a cold contact?
Yes, I think the question underscores the point that I made, that I believe very strongly that sales engineers still have a very important role to play. It's also essential that one has a system that allows sales engineers to monitor and control their own activities, and also that management can also exercise a degree of control. With sales engineers, it's a natural human reflection to focus one's time and efforts on those customers where one knows there's going to be a degree of welcome. But the real challenge for good sales engineers is opening up new opportunities, and there must be considerable emphasis on that. It can be very tough. It's not easy to endure continual rebuffs, but if you have that conviction that you have a product or a service to sell, then very often persistence pays off.
Yes, thank you, Christopher. Yes, I think persistence, but being belief in what the offer you've got to make. I think that's key. Question from Robin. Moving on to measurement. This will be an interesting one. Measuring marketing success and value in terms of inputs and outputs. Do you have any, Christopher? Have you any sort of metrics that you like to use or would suggest would be worth considering?
It's a challenge, and the best tool that you have available for measuring success is via the MIS system. It will show you, for instance, very clearly the conversion rate from offers, quotations, tenders to actual contracts. It will allow a lot of information to be developed in terms of how the potential market is growing. But having said that, it is in the engineering world a greater challenge than it is in the marketing for consumer products, where in my reference to advertising, you can run an advertising campaign in the consumer product area, and a month later you can look up in Nielsen and you can see that your market share has changed from 6.7 to 7.3%. But in the world that I think most of the listeners are involved, that is clearly not feasible. So I can only refer back again to using the MIS to its full capacity in order to measure your activity, the level of activity, and the success it generates.
Yes, thank you, Christopher. And a sort of follow-on question from Praveen around MIS, and he's asking if there are any particular softwares which are noted in the market. I mean, I know there are many. I have to say I'm not an expert in this area in terms of MIS software. Are there any that, Christopher, you've come across, or what would you recommend if someone was doing some search for potential tools?
Tim, I would very much wish to be helpful in this area, but I have to confess that virtually all of my experience is working with MIS systems that we've developed internally. All I can rather lamely suggest is go on Google and do a search through there. You'll certainly find that there are large numbers. The first task is really to differentiate between those that are consumer product orientated and those that are more business to business orientated. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful in that respect.
Yes, and certainly CRM systems are many and multiple. And I have to say, the experience of marketing I had, the story I shared, um, we developed a shared spreadsheet. And in fact, in developing that shared spreadsheet amongst the team, we identified what the key information was that we needed to capture. What that was probably missing was the ability to sort of handle lots of data and have sort of more automated systems. And I think that's where some of the new systems, more modern systems, can add to that. So thank you for that question, Praveen. Question from Philip, now moving on to marketing in where the emphasis is more on innovative or disruptive technologies rather than, let's say, standard. So where a more sophisticated approach may be required. And I mean, currently, some of the things I'm looking at in looking at the investment case for hydrogen, it is quite complex because you're looking at the customers who are looking to use hydrogen in different ways. So that does require, I suppose, more time to develop a marketing opportunity, but also need to be, I guess, more collaborative in the conversations with potential customers or even other partners in the investment you're looking at. Christopher, do you have any thoughts on the matter of marketing where there is more of an emphasis on innovative or disruptive technologies?
Yes. Well, I mean, there are two obvious aspects to this, whether oneself marketing a disruptive technology or one's marketing a product that is potentially subject to disruptive technology. And the classic example we're all familiar with is the development of electric vehicles and the consequent impact on combustion engines and all the components that go into it. And this is why in that slide I particularly flagged up that as part of the whole marketing strategy, there should be a continuing awareness of what is on the horizon in terms of a new technology that could totally disrupt the current business. So that's one aspect of it. If you're selling a disruptive technology, then you are in a very strong position. But it needs obvious care and planning in determining how quickly and how securely one can market that product, because the likelihood is that the introduction will generate counter-reaction from other suppliers of more conventional products and services.
Great, that's very helpful. And Mira has very kindly answered one of the previous questions from Praveen. He said that Salesforce as a tool is widely used for MIS and as well as SAP. So there's a couple of things to look for in terms of doing a wider search. And Mira's also asked a question about what the routes to getting more awareness of sales and marketing for those who are engineers. And a couple of other people have asked about how you might go around getting more expertise in marketing, and also how helpful was an MBA. I mentioned I did an MBA, and it certainly was helpful in building on my experience, but certainly the opportunity to actually work in a marketing environment, be involved with a marketing business, that was nothing like that for what I call fast learning. So, Christopher, do you have any thoughts in terms of how engineers or non-engineers might develop themselves?
Yes, indeed. Often I've experienced a situation where sales engineers are engaged in a project, but feel that they themselves don't have sufficient technical expertise fully to answer all of the questions put to them by the potential customer. And one very useful channel to use is to go back to the design department and ask if an engineer from the design department or from the manufacturing area could accompany them. And that has a double benefit. It provides support to the sales engineer, and it also gives exposure to people mainly involved in design and manufacture of the challenges of marketing. So I think this is a responsibility for senior management to give all engineers the opportunity to gain experience in areas that they're not necessarily immediately familiar with. When we were running the series on finance for engineers, we frequently came across this situation that the engineers felt themselves almost in a silo and struggled to gain access to support and information on the financial side. With marketing, as I've just said, there are more easy ways in which exposure can be provided. And indeed, that may, in fact, encourage some engineers to change their career direction and focus more on marketing than on other aspects.
Yes, and it's definitely what I describe as an exciting area to learn more about, and encourage any engineer to learn a bit more, even if they don't end up spending a lot of time in the marketing business. To actually communicate with those who are doing the marketing is very helpful. Number of questions here coming are so building on the social media aspect and smaller companies being able to actually do effective marketing, particularly when there's so much information out there. I'm not sure if Christopher and I have that detailed expertise, but certainly what I'm picking up from some of the questions from Guillaume in particular, he talks about having trust. How do you build trust amongst organizations, particularly if you're working with, he talks about local authorities who are looking to use local agency or other representatives, but some of these agencies work for several customers. So I suppose it's in a sort of environment where there's appears to be growing connections. How do you maintain element of trust and sort of the confidentiality and that, I think that's something I'm certainly picking up. How you sort of preserve your intellectual property when you've got organizations who are now working with many more customers. Does that ring any bells with you, Christopher?
Yes, my immediate response is make sure as far as you possibly can that you have patents covering your new technologies. If you don't, then you're exposing yourself to other companies in other parts of the world copying your ideas, and as a consequence diluting the otherwise benefits that would be gained by all that effort in producing the new technology in the first place. But in terms of overall ethics and how one builds up the trust, then the first thing that you need to ensure is that you have the requisite integrity within your own organization. And that is very important. And it's only when you've achieved that and you have a confidence level of your own integrities and, of course, the quality and performance of your products that you can then go with confidence to develop that necessary trust with your potential customer. But it does need, in my experience, close and personal contact. It's very difficult to generate the necessary level of trust simply by sending emails or social media. We've all in the last 12 or 18 months had sufficient experience of Zoom and Teams to know that yes, it has an important contribution to make, but in the end it has some significant limitations. So I would just conclude in this respect by saying if you're going to build up trust, it has to be through direct personal relationships.
Okay. And I would certainly support that. And social media interacting through webinars or through online, it certainly it is possible to build those relationships, but you have to work in a different way, I would suggest. And a question from Yen, which I think is an interesting one, and that's how do you, if you've got a customer or a number of customers who are always asking for quotations but never buy in the end, what would your advice, Christopher, be on sort of managing that sort of marketing dilemma?
It is a very real dilemma, and I empathise and sympathise with the questioner. Many of us have been there. The instant response is to say that they have a lower level of priority than customers who've actually you've been able to secure business from them. As I pointed out in my contribution, it's not just the time and the effort and the money required in preparing proposals for a customer who never produces an order, but the indirect cost that those resources could have been used elsewhere and would have, in all probability, had a higher level of success. I know I'm repeating myself to a certain extent, but this also relates to MIS, that if you've got an efficient MIS system, you can very easily spot trends, those customers who generate business, those who just simply take up a lot of your resource with very little result. So that's a way in which you can prioritize inquiries, just simply by seeing what the past history is.
Okay, well, thank you for that, and thank you for all the questions which are coming. I think we've got time for a couple more, and maybe even a couple more. Usefully, some of the questions have come in with actually some answers. Raymond has suggested that there was a question around establishing new companies, new clients. The suggestion here to focus is on understanding and listening to the client, what they want, rather than focusing on what your offer is. So you need to balance that. And a couple of clients have come in. Clint in particular has talked about smaller organisations which may not have dedicated sales or indeed marketing teams, and how to persuade the board or persuade the organisation that it needs to put effort into those sort of activities. What would you suggest, Christopher? What's the best way of making the case for sales and marketing?
Well, it doesn't matter how good your product is, how good the potential service you have to offer is, if the world outside is not aware of it. So I regard marketing as indispensable, even with the smallest of operations. But unless the business is market orientated, then it's most unlikely that it's going to fulfill its possible potential.
Okay, and I think a final question from Michael here, and then I hope we've got to as many of the questions that you've kindly offered. It's been great to actually learn from where your questions have taken our conversation. And the final one from Michael I'm going to take is with extended supply chains and also markets where prices are moving quite quickly. I'm thinking myself of when I was working in gas, and now thinking about hydrogen and the market to be established. How can you can sustain a relationship between parties when the market is moving around you? And I think that really relies on having a good trust and a good share of understanding of what the market environment is and what the opportunities might be. And a final word from yourself, Christopher. How would you deal with those situations when there's uncertainty in the market?
Yeah. It's very difficult, and there's obviously no magic solution to this, but one of the most important factors, I believe, is being absolutely open with your customer, even if you are in a position where you have to communicate bad news. It's much better for the customer to have a true picture of what is happening, and you're much more likely to gain his support and understanding if you're prepared to speak quite openly and communicate quite openly about the problems, and then obviously the measures that you're taking to alleviate or remedy the problems that you find. But if you've got a container stuck in the middle of the China Seas, there are not any immediate ready solutions available, and it's slightly off the main topic for today, but I have a considerable degree of satisfaction that many British companies are now recognizing that just simply looking at the price of a product without recognizing all the risk elements and also the challenges of transport and the extended management that's required. And hence we're seeing more product now being manufactured in the UK, which I think is entirely welcome.
Okay, Chris, well, that's a great final thought. And you mentioned relationship with clients. I feel that those of you who've joined our marketing webinar today are our clients, and we look very much forward to your feedback. I know there'll be a survey request going afterwards. And thank you again for joining us today. And look out for future opportunities to learn from our sharing of experience. And also we'd welcome your suggestions as to where we might take our subject matter in the future. I'm going to close there. Thank Christopher. Thanks Fiona and Natalie at the IMechE.
Add my thanks to all of you who've been listening. And just to say, I'm mindful that there are many questions I can see here that time hasn't allowed us to answer. So if I could suggest you send an email, I and Tim will endeavour to give you an answer to the question we were not able to cover today. But again, my thanks. Goodbye.